I always describe it as language as image. And I think the roots of my use of language, the image of language, or language as image in my work, has its roots in my family history. So my father was Mira Schor was an artist, and he specialized in Judaica. I did not read Hebrew, so I only could experience the language on my father's work, which was very beautifully done, as image. So the connection between art and language, or drawing and language form, and the letters of language were established before I could write and read myself. I loved learning how to write, and to me it was like drawing. So there was a real bond already before, I became an artist, between language, the image of language, and language as image. So at first it was just block letters, and just words. And what I wanted to do was to express also that women were filled with language. Because when I became an artist, I was very, very committed to the representation of the reality of living inside a female body, what it meant to live inside a female body. And I was very... I had a sense that no one really cared what was inside women's minds, really. That society itself was not really concerned with that. And so I began to think of it as women are filled with language, and my task as an artist, or my desire, was to express that in my work. The only other part that I didn't really go into is that I've complicated matters by also being a writer. In my mid-30s, I began to write about art and about teaching and about politics. And that was one of my challenges in later works in the 90s, to really, when I started to work in oil, was to embed language within materialities. In a way, I'm still bringing a feminist sensibility and maybe a female sense of embodiment, and bringing language into that through the incredible flesh-like quality of oil, which I, love. Well, I'm a very lucky person generationally, because I came of age with the feminist movement, the second wave feminism that began to develop at the end of the 1960s, and really, became in the United States anyway, was like a national movement with a tremendous amount of excitement behind it. But feminism answered a question, an existential question for me. I valued my intelligence, and I valued language, and I valued my artistic abilities. I also felt resistance, like every woman does to this moment, resistance to your voice being heard or your ambitions being taken seriously. And there were role models, but mostly they were, 19th century women writers. I was just so lucky that I had that, kind of like to bring me forward. And then I was lucky again because I decided to go to Cal Arts. But my sister heard of Cal Arts and told me about the experimental nature of the school, and that these programs were going to be, planned, the feminist program, the following year in art. So I had to decide whether I wanted to be part of that, because being part of it meant being a little separate. It was a historic moment, and this was a historic opportunity. It set the path of my life in a way. And in the program, which, we can talk more about, but it became very clear that it was very important for women to create their own discourse. And to, if the mainstream would not allow you to, or would not listen to you, or would not allow you the opportunity to show, or to do things the way you felt was important for the work and for your ideas, you had to do it yourself. So you had to write your own art criticism, you had to curate your own shows, you had to write your own books. And the other thing that I came to learn through studying art history, but then through the beginnings of feminist art history. Any kind of text keeps you in history when your images may fall out of history or even be misattributed or something. I love clothing, and I love the history of costume. And I actually, when I went to college, I actually even went on a visit to Pratt Institute, which was famous for its fashion department. And the minute I visited, I understood that, of course, I wasn't really interested in becoming a fashion designer. I was interested in drawing. But I had done hundreds and hundreds of drawings. I taught myself how to do it the way, in those days, in the New York Times, the main newspaper in New York, there were no photographs of Paris fashion shows. There were drawings, sketches, and I taught myself how to do it. So when I got out of art school, I had done a few things in the feminist program that had to do with costume or items of women's clothing, but more satirically. First I thought, well, I'll just do some paintings of dresses, but with no figure in them, just empty dresses. I didn't even think it, I just did it. And then I thought, well, I don't need the, in the figure-ground relation, I don't really need the ground. I will look for the form. And so I cut away the background. So then I just had the shape of the dress. And then I always follow form as much as I follow whatever narrative. So over a period of, starting in '74, they became more surrealistic, simpler, more sculptural. They remained small. And then, the next step was to do those things life-size. They didn't have language. And at that point, I was beginning to think about how does the viewer interact with this object, which is fragile. And then gradually, in between, there were a number of work, and one was a work that I did that I call Book of Pages. It's simply exactly what that sounds like, with writing and a lot of dry pigment. It's a very physical object. And I had done that work because I wanted to do something that was a major work, but not big in size, so it's just a book that you turn the pages of. So now I had the dress, and I had the pages, and that work was on rice paper and the materials. So all of that came together in '77 with both the masks and then the dresses. This is the first time they've ever been framed. But their original existence was as things, and they were on the wall. I didn't have even the possibility of imagining framing them, but framing them actually offers the ability to see front and back. It precludes the opportunity to turn the pages. The paper gave me the opportunity, it suggested to me, like if I was working on a piece of rice paper, I started with more or less normal art papers, the first dresses. And then I had some rice paper that I'd inherited from my father because he had made prints, so I just had it around for years. I thought, well, I'll try the rice paper. And in a way, as I worked on it, it suggested that it was transparent. And it suggested that as I did one mask, or dress or whatever, that it left the trace of itself on the paper. For some reason I left the masks, but I continued working with paper until the mid-'80s in different ways, and then I made the transition to oil paint around that time. If we go back to the fact that I joined the feminist art program when I got to CalArts in the fall of '71, they had a project. The women who had already been there had already discussed the idea of doing a project that would be collaborative. And they decided the idea of a house and woman, so that was the title, was Woman House. Not the Woman House, but Woman House. And they'd already actually found a house in Hollywood that was going to be demolished for urban renewal. So they rented it from the city of Hollywood for $1 or something like that. They tried to arrive at what the house would be but through consciousness-raising sessions, which was very much a part of the feminist movement or the women's liberation movement at that time, where you would select a subject, money, sex, father, mother, but clothing, different things, to share your experiences with. And then the idea was that the projects at Women House would be developed, and then you also had the option of a room, and you had to have ideas about the room. To me, I took it as the opportunity to do something I'd never done, which was to do a large painting. And I was painting women in rooms, often at night, and also sometimes looking out on a red moon. So to me, that was very exciting to choose. And I had to choose a room where I could have the walls without windows. So I chose a walk-in closet, which meant I had no light. But anyway, it was the biggest work I'd ever done. And it was a self-portrait of myself, and then there were phases of the moon, including and so it was called Red Moon Room. So I was standing in the painting, self-portrait, pointing at the moon. The funny thing about the painting downstairs is that the only thing that's red is the moon, and it's actually really a very blue painting. But I wouldn't say it's tragic exactly, but there's a sadness to the Red Moon Room in that when you get to be my age, you do think, have I done what I intended to do? Have I done what I set out in life to do? Have I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish? And that's what the figure is asking the moon, is here is time spirit. This is what I've done. I'm very, very happy with the installation. The fact that the floor is white was very important to me, especially because that room was not originally a conventional exhibition space for flat, paintings or drawings. But I felt that the works had to kind of float. And also what I really think is amazing is that work is facing Crazy Lady, which was one of the most risk-taking objects that I've ever made, and expresses the most anxiety, in a way, of all of the dresses, some of which are very beautiful, some are very, kind of self-contained, and some are fragile, but Crazy Lady is more than fragile. The fact that that's facing, with the blue on it, is facing the new Red Moon Room is very, very interesting to me. My sense of success of an artwork is if somebody who is not an artist comes in and feels free enough and not, worried about whether they know anything about art or whatever. But if they express what they see and feel, often they hit it right on the nose. They really get it. And so I hope that happens. But it's also personal. Some people find things scary, or, they bring their own emotions, to it. And that I can't guess. What I thought about first was that in recent years, people have said to me that my work has a European feeling. And that has an interesting history for me. So I was born in New York City. I'm an American. My parents were refugees, lucky to save their lives. They lived in Paris when the Germans were on their way into Paris. They arrive in New York City just as abstract expressionism is beginning to take hold. And then in my childhood, the discussions at the family table had to do with the art criticism at that time and the critical point of view, which was very dogmatic. The American artist at that time felt that they had to separate themselves from Europe. They had to break from Europe and assert their own identity. So they started, criticizing Europe as the aesthetic was too delicate, too feminine, too, decorative. A very bad word. As I grew up, I was semi-European as well. I think there is an American aspect to my work. I began to do, sort of took the shape of the dress and turned it into a stencil that was more simplified, like placing it into landscape. And they had a kind of mystical quality to them, beautiful color. And suddenly I thought, for the first time, I feel like an American artist because I am touching on an American tradition of mystical landscape painting. In the 19th century, there were also artists that, did work where there was a kind of spiritual quality to the landscapes. And so I would say, actually, when I, out loud, or when I would talk about my work, I would say this is the first time where I really feel like I'm part of an American tradition. Now I think that my work hovers on both sides because the painting downstairs, it's really very similar to some paintings that were very, very important to me when I was a teenager and a young woman. Giotto's chapel, the Scrovegni chapel, and the way in which space is compressed and the use of blue. So in a way I've reverted back to some of my European roots, but then I'm also doing some quite political work. It still has probably a European flavor. So I'm both. I'm a dual figure, even though I'm an American.